So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henry, and I'm a data analyst with Seer. Thank you for coming to our house shop. So I've only joined Seer. I only joined Seer about 3 months ago. And before I joined the Seer team, I completed my PhD in astrophysics at the Australian National University, and I was working as an academic at the University of Sydney. And you might think that the only job of an academic is to do research and sort of push the boundaries of science. But perhaps an even more important job is to be able to communicate your research to your peers and general public. And the reason for that is because if the only person that can understand your research is yourself, what's really the point? No one's going to give you funding, no one's going to give you a job. So being able to communicate your thoughts and ideas in a way that everyone can understand is a skill, and it really does take practice. And hopefully in this presentation, I can give you a brief starting point to those of you that want to get better at this. So we'll mostly be talking about the human visual perception system and its role in efficient storytelling. Hopefully I can just maximize my screen now. Great. So these are the broad topics that we'll be covering today. This is going to be a two-part series, with this one focusing mainly on the roles of charts in storytelling and some best practices. The next part will be the next part in the series will be sort of a masterclass where we hope to start early next year. And that will basically be a much smaller group of people where we go more hands-on into building the charts and sort of getting feedback from each other and bouncing ideas off each other. So it'll be more of a discussion type of thing. We'll release more information of that about that in the future regarding the dates and class numbers. But today what we'll be doing is just talking about why data storytelling is important, the purpose of charts in your story, general human nature and visual behaviors, and how we can use that to optimize our charts, and just a few best practices that you can employ yourselves. Now, please just interrupt me if there's anything you want me to go over again, or if you have any questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. We've got plenty of time today, so don't feel bad if you want to focus on a particular part. So I've adapted a lot of this presentation from one that was given by our co-founder Adam a few weeks ago. We received a lot of feedback that we thought it would be useful to present to a much larger audience. So the three main pillars of data visualization are to provide a clear message, be honest and accurate with your depiction, and to make it visually appealing. And these roughly correspond to the broad topics that we'll be covering. And if we expand a little bit on each of these points, when making charts, we want to be as honest and accurate as possible. A lot of deceptive charts can be accidentally made by not paying attention to the axis limits, and you should always be honest about the limitations of your data and what you can actually derive from them. To send a clear message, you also first need to be very clear about the story you want to tell in your head and the logical flow of the different sections in your story. And you also want to be emphasizing the important themes so that your audience doesn't need to dig around for your point. And finally, you want to make your charts look good, right? And this basically just means using the right colors, shapes, spacing, and this just helps make your charts as intuitive as possible. Again, this is all just to try and reduce the mental load on your audience. So, before I get into it, this is a type of poem that I've always enjoyed reading, and this particular one went viral a few years ago. So it's titled Dyslexia, and what it says is, "I'm stupid. Nobody would ever say that I have a talent for words. I was meant to be great. That is wrong. I am a failure. Nobody could ever convince me to think that I can make it in life." So the kicker with this poem is that it's actually meant to be read backwards. So if I read it backwards, what it says is, "I can make it in life. Nobody could ever convince me to think that I am a failure. That is wrong. I was meant to be great. I have a talent for words. Nobody would ever say that I'm stupid." So why have I shown you this? The point that I'm trying to make here is that storytelling isn't just about having the right words and information on the page. The order in which you deliver this information is just as important as the information itself. You might have also noticed that when I was reading it backwards, I enunciated very different words, and all of this sort of ties into how you tell a good story. You want to be establishing a logical flow during points of discontinuity because this helps keep the audience immersed and engaged. For example, in this presentation so far, every time I switch slides, when possible, I try to refer back to the previous slide. And that just means that the linkage is always there. And this helps keep the story flowing in the mind of your audience. Now, now, I want you to all try and draw a picture in your mind and imagine what I'm trying to describe here. So I have 2 large arms with 4 smaller arms protruding from my main arms. I am made up of billions of individual light sources and I'm surrounded by clouds of wispy blue gas. The blue gas tells you that I'm young and active, while my red arms tell you that I'm slowly getting older. I have a bright and heavy core, which holds me together as I twirl around, and my nickname is the Southern Pinwheel because of my distinct shape and orientation. So does everyone have a vague, convoluted image in their mind? Now, I'd be pretty impressed if any of you managed to guess what I was describing, unless you had some sort of background in astronomy. This is M83. And I'm pretty proud of this galaxy because I actually helped make this during my PhD. And to this day, it's probably my top 2 favorite galaxies. It's just very nice and aesthetic. Now, the reason we use visualizations when we tell stories is that it's usually a lot easier just to see the thing instead of trying to describe it in words. I've only put 5 dot points here, but I could easily write paragraphs trying to describe this exact image. But there is a caveat to that. If I just gave you this picture by itself, could you tell me exactly where the 6 spiral arms are and where the clouds of wispy blue gas that I described are? Probably not, right? So just for reference, here are the 2 main spiral arms, which form the majority of the structure. And here are the smaller secondary arms. And here are the clouds of wispy blue gas, which form the stellar nurseries of the galaxy. Now, if I asked an astronomer where the spiral arms are and where the gas reservoirs were, I wouldn't need to annotate anything because they have so much prior knowledge. They've seen this image 1,000 times. But for people that don't have that background, there's no chance that you could spot these things easily. So the classic saying is that a picture tells 1,000 words, but without context or expertise, you're really relying on the audience to know exactly when and where to look. And again, this increases the mental load on your audience and disrupts the train of thought while they're trying to follow your overall story. Slabs of text often drain the attention span of your audience. And as we clearly saw, they're not very efficient at describing a chart or visualization. The efficient way to go about this is to use charts in conjunction with annotations to draw the attention of your audience to specific areas of interest. Now, for a more relevant example, this is the number of assaults in Western Australia. And we've split it up by family and non-family related assault. So you can see here that the vague trend is that over time, non-family assault in red has remained fairly steady, but the family assault in purple has been on the uptrend, crossing over sometime in 2012. But there is a small subtlety here that isn't immediately obvious without pointing it out. What you can see is that there is an embedded annual trend where the cases spike during the Christmas holiday period. So without explicitly stating it and showing you, you might have just written it off as stochasticity, but now we can clearly see there is some sort of defined annual trend. Without me pointing it out, this important detail might have gone unnoticed, when in fact it might make all the difference to, say, an organization who is looking for this sort of thing. So it's really important to make sure that you shouldn't be taking any risks when trying to convey information to your audience. You always want to make sure that it's very clear-cut and obvious. Before I continue, does anyone have any questions? Any comments? All right, sweet. Now, one of the questions that our co-founder received during his presentation was how can charts be used to deceive? Specifically, charts that are technically correct, but very misleading. Apparently, this was a problem in one of the communities. And the most common way that people do this is by adjusting the vertical axis in a favorable way. So these are just a couple of charts that I took from the first page of Google when searching up deceptive charts. So I'll start with the one on the left. And what we have on the left is the number of gun deaths in Florida. So from the early 90s up into the mid 2000s, we can see a gradual increase in the amount of firearm homicide. And then in 2005, they enacted this stand your ground law. Now, I had a brief read of what this could be. And from my understanding, it's basically a law that says you don't have to sort of make an attempt to run away or escape before being able to claim it was self-defense. And based on this chart, it appears to have led to a dramatic decrease in the gun deaths. However, if you pay careful attention to the vertical axis, you can see that's actually upside down. So gun deaths were actually decreasing until the mid 2000s, and then they had a large spike when they introduced this new law. Now, I'm not sure if this was actually used in some sort of news article, but it is like it's a very extreme example of what goes on when people try and use charts to deceive people. The one on the right is actually a lot more common, and you'll find it everywhere if you start looking. So both of these charts are showing the exact same data and information, but the one on the left has a truncated vertical axis, and that starts at 50, whereas the one on the right goes from 0 to 100. And what this does is that it creates the illusion that the difference is bigger than it actually is. I really encourage you to just, if you see a chart in a news article, and see if you can notice these sort of things. I bet you they're everywhere. Now, right, so we've covered why charts are important and how powerful they can be in influencing your audience. What are some of the ways you can make your chart as impactful as possible? Often the best ways are to use human nature to your advantage. The human brain is sort of designed to recognize patterns, and if something breaks an established pattern, it's immediately obvious. So here are two examples using size and shape, and I'm sure everyone here can very easily spot the odd one out in these groups. Two different ways that you can also differentiate are, say, using orientation and color. Again, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear which are the odd ones out in these two examples. So you can see here on the left that one of the right turn signals is rotated 180 degrees, and the circle on the right is obviously a different color to the rest of it. Very easy to spot. Now, by using these differences, you can easily highlight points of interest in your graphic or make a distinct differentiation between your variables without the need for explicitly pointing them out like I've been in this presentation. However, the name of the game here is intuitiveness and simplicity. And it can be often a little bit confusing if you combine multiple points of differentiation into a single chart. So here what we've done is we've used differences in size and color. And to be fair, sometimes this is entirely necessary based on how complex your data is. But you just need to be aware that it does open you up to the possibility of more confusion and making your message less clear and intuitive. At the end of the day, you know your data the best, and you should experiment with the best ways to represent it. So we've just covered, before I go on, is that clear to everyone? Does everyone sort of understand where I'm getting at, where I'm coming from? Feel free to speak out if you want to talk about it. Screen chat. Yep, that's a good point, Nicole. There's definitely a lot of monthly occurrences, payout time, good pattern detection. Yeah, so like pattern detection is something that humans are very good at. And for example, in that family domestic violence data, we could see very clear spikes at certain points. And I think to someone who's used to seeing that sort of data, that stuff immediately pops out at you, right? But if you're showing that data to, say, the general public, they're not entirely sure what to look out for, and they might just say, oh, cool, it's increasing over time. But it's these little subtle things that actually make all the difference. Yeah, great point. Awesome. So we've just covered how to use color, spatial orientation, and such to differentiate things. But how can we use these same principles to indicate continuity and a flow of data? So Gestaltism is a branch of psychology which emerged in the early 20th century. And basically what it does is it provides an overview of how certain patterns and configurations give rise to specific perceptions. This is getting a little bit technical into the technical side of things. So it'll be easy if I just show you two specific examples. Now on the, oh, that's a little bit strange. Sorry about that. So on the left, we have two lines. And we just talked about how color can be used to split two groups of data. However, the human brain also prefers to follow smooth, continuous lines. So even though these lines are made up of different colors, at least for me, the natural way of perceiving this image is a straight line and a curved line. And even though the colors are changing within the line themselves, my brain is telling me that, oh, these are just a single straight line and a curved line, because my brain wants to follow a continuous, smooth trajectory. And on the right, we have a grid of circles. But the spacing of the circles in the horizontal and vertical direction are slightly different. And this gives the perception that we have grouped them into columns of circles as opposed to a grid. So this is known as proximity. It's always good to be aware of how spacing can be used to generate a preconceived idea of your data before the brain kicks in to decipher the underlying message. Because it's these sort of instant clues that can really affect how your information is perceived. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't try not to overthink this too much. These are sort of just like small general things that have slight effects, but it won't make or break any of your charts. So don't try not to get too stressed if you're thinking too many, if there are too many overwhelming things at the moment. So I've covered quite a lot of information here, but how does this all tie into data storytelling? Well, the common theme and the key to data storytelling is to make it as effortless as possible for your audience to follow your train of thought. If things are meant to naturally flow on from each other, make them continuous and smooth. But if you want to highlight differences, you want to make them as distinct as possible. So in practice, how do we actually do this? Well, I will show you, oh, that's a bit of a spoiler. I will show you a quick example that I made up here. So one of the easiest things that you can do is to think about your color choice when making charts. If you're clever about your color choice, what you can do is you can actually encode information into the colors themselves. So for example, here what I have is a chart showing the estimated resident population of Australia in different age brackets from 0 to 4 years, 5 to 9 years, 5 years. And each of these colors represents a different year. So 2016, 2017, 2018, 19, and 20. So what you can see here is that from red, 2016, orange, 2017, as we go further on years, our population has been increasing in almost every age bracket. So the trend is up over time, but there is a better way we can color this to allow for a more intuitive sense of the trend. Does anyone have any suggestions, or does anyone know where I'm getting at here? No? Okay, so one way that we can color this to make it more intuitive is actually by doing this. So if I just change the color scheme quickly to this, okay. So just make it smaller. Oops. So what I've done is I've changed the colors, and what I've done is I've colored them all in a single color, but using different shades. So what you can see here is that, okay, if we just look at the legend, we see, okay, 2016 is dark, 2017 is slightly lighter, and it gets lighter and lighter as the years go on. Now you can much more easily see that the trend is going from bottom to top. So we can see that everything is increasing over time. Whereas previously, what we had to do was say, okay, red's 2016, that's this line, orange is 2017, that's this line. Oh, okay, so that means that the population is increasing over time. So by making this sort of natural progression by using color or luminance, we can just take a quick look and see that the darker colors, the dark colors represent earlier years and the lighter colors represent present years. And it becomes very easy to see the overall trend over time. So this is just basically the same thing that I showed just now. The general rule of thumb is that if there's a natural order or progression of the data, you should try and encode it with luminance. And that just adds that little bit of extra intuitiveness to it. If there's no natural order to your data, you can try and color by different hues. So what do I mean by that? So when picking colors for your charts, you can also be tactical about which colors you actually choose. So in general, what you want to be doing is selecting complementary colors. So things on the other side, on opposite sides of the color wheel. Now, this is because these are very easily distinguishable from each other. And following on from if things flow, make them continuous. If they're different, you want to make them as different as possible. So it makes sense that we want to be using colors that are as distinct as possible to make it easier on the eyes. If you need more than 2 colors, ideally what you would do is you would make colors evenly spaced around the color wheel. Now, I'm not sure how many of you make charts using Excel, but you might notice that blue and orange, that is the default color when you make bar charts with Excel. And that's for this reason exactly. That's not by chance. So we'll just go into the platform one more time for one more quick example. And this time what we'll do is we'll look at we'll look at the migration in Australia. So what you can see here is we have 3 different types of migration and 3 different states. Now the colors that we've used here are blue, teal, and green. Now if we go back to our color wheel, what you can see is that blue, teal, and green, they're right next to each other. So they're not very spaced out, and it may be difficult to distinguish if we didn't have such massive bars. If these were any thinner, they'd start to blend in with each other, right? So instead, why don't we pick some colors that are more evenly spaced around the color bar? So we can pick orange, green, and purple. So I won't show it here for now. I can just show it quickly through this. So by changing the colors to orange, green, and purple, you can see that these are much more distinct and poppy. They're very distinguishable from each other. And now, and this sort of makes it it just reduces the mental load on your audience so that they can spend more time and attention just focusing on the overall message that you want to say. Now just bring these 2 things together. It's important to know when it makes sense to use a line chart or a bar chart and what colors to use. So on the left of this slide, what we have is a line chart showing different produce ranges, so apples, oranges, milk, bread, over different years. So different years are different colors. Now you can see here we've done a clever thing, and what we've done is we've colored each year with a different luminance. So we see 2017's light, and as we go further in time, they get darker and darker. So we can obviously see that the trend is like this. However, the problem is that when using a line chart, what you're doing is you're connecting all these categories together with a single line by year, and it implies that you can interpolate between them. Now, what I mean by that is it doesn't make sense that there's something that's in between an apple and orange. So this point doesn't make sense. And likewise, there's nothing in between oranges and milk. And that's what a continuous line sort of implies. So since there are distinct categories here that can't be interpolated between, it makes sense. It makes more sense to use a bar chart where we can easily distinguish the categories that can't be that aren't on a smooth interpolated surface. And we can still make use of the color encoding or luminance encoding in the bar chart to allow the viewer to more easily recognize the natural regression through each year. In this case, we have the natural color progression and we go from left to right. So this just makes everything much more visually appealing and easier to see. Now, suppose we really want to use a line chart for whatever reason. How can we change our variables for this to make sense? If anyone has any idea, feel free to shout out. All right, so some of you might have figured it out. If we flip things around and instead make our legend the different types of produce and have the different years on the x-axis, it makes a lot more sense that we can interpolate between years, right? So there's no issue with this line chart here because there's a natural progression from 2017 to 2018 to 2019, etc. However, now that we have different categories as our legends, we want to be making these as distinct as possible, right? So we choose colors that are on opposite sides of the color or evenly spaced out. And you can see these colors are very different from each other, and it's very easy to distinguish between one and the other. In fact, what we've done here actually is we've only picked 4 colors. So we have blue, purple, orange, and green. And then we've sort of faded them out to different shades. This is one option if this is an alternative if you don't want to use too many distinct colors. Because sometimes when you have so in this case, we would try and get 7 distinct colors, right? And that might just make everything very murky and messy. So this is another option that you can do if you want to pursue this type of chart. And again, bar charts are always safe. So in general, you can always represent your data as a bar chart, as you can see on the right. So in 2017, we have our own set of bars and different colors to differentiate between these different categories. Now, the final sort of tip that I have for you is that if there is no natural order to your variables, so again, we'll take the example of different produce, apple, oranges, milk. If there is no natural order, what you can do is you can try sorting your data in ascending or descending order. For example, in the migration example, I had the states ordered in descending order, and in this example, we have them in ascending order. Because the variables of this chart are just names of produce, there isn't really a logical order you can put these in. I mean, you could put them in alphabetical, but does that really make any more sense than another thing? So in this case, you can see that there's no harm in just putting them in ascending order like the chart on the right. And you can see that it just makes it look a bit nicer and cleaner. And it's these sort of things which really make your chart, they can make your chart look a lot nicer to someone who's seeing it for the first time. So there are quite literally hundreds of different ways which you can represent the same set of data points. And the best way to represent your data comes down to the message you're trying to convey, the audience, and the amount of detail that you want to retain. So each of these different charts, they show the same information in varying levels of detail in varying representations. The more you read and watch, the more experience you will gain and will be exposed to different chart types. Ultimately, you will know the best way to represent your data and convey the message that you want to your audience. So just the more you do it, the more you'll know the best way to convey your message. So just summing up, data visualizations don't speak for themselves. And this brings me back to the point I made earlier in that you shouldn't be relying on your audience to know exactly what to take away from your images. Everyone has different prior knowledge and experiences and they could have takeaway points that are very different from what you intended. So it's always handy to have a short statement about exactly what you want to highlight with each graphic that you present, just so that you're not taking that risk. So we didn't have a huge amount of time today, but I do hope that you've all learned something, even if it's just a small thing. Just remember that before you start making a presentation or dashboard or any sort of representation of information, you always want to make sure that you have a clear idea of the story you want to tell in your head. And that's just so that, because if you don't have a clear story in your head, that's not going to come out in whatever you're going to be producing. Charts and visualizations are a great way of delivering a message in an efficient manner. but you have to have text as well to supplement that, because it'll make sure that your key takeaway points are emphasized, and you always want to make sure that your charts are as intuitive as possible. Finally, this last point is brought up really, really often, but I can't understand how useful it is. Try and practice with someone who doesn't have much background or context into your work. This will help sort of fill in any knowledge gaps that your audience may have when presenting to a larger group. We often get trapped in surrounding ourselves with people with the same experience and knowledge, and this is natural when you're just working with other people. So we always want to be trying to make sure that we are accommodating a large range of possible audiences. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have, I'll reach out if anyone has any question.
Yeah, actually, I think the overall presentation, because sometimes when we are doing things with data, it's good to review back on like the different type of audience and the intensity of the color, how it really give a very different message. Definitely.
Yeah. And you also want to be, on that point of color, you do also want to be sort of accessible. So I remember when I was writing papers in astronomy, one of the things that was mandated only a few years ago is that all of your charts and graphs, they have to be colorblind friendly. So we could only use specific colors. And that was so that it was more accessible to people. And an even crazier thing that we had to, this wasn't mandated, but something that people are often saying was that try and make it so that your chart can be read in black and white. Because when people print off things using printers, right, they don't always print color. So you always want to be trying to make it even black and white friendly. So it really is a rabbit hole, like how deep you want to be going into these things. So I do want to emphasize that these are like best practices, and try not to get bogged down in the details. At the end of the day, just make things simple and intuitive, people will get it. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Like I said in the at the beginning, we will be trying to host a couple of masterclasses where we go a little bit more hands-on. So for those of you that perhaps want more details, or you want a bit more practice where you can help bounce your ideas on other people, we'll be releasing more information into that in the future. But other than that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.